Sisi na rais tumekuta madeni ya 9.8 trillion. Tunalipa. Hatuwezi ruka, hiyo ni madeni ni ya Kenya. Si mimi nilisema pale Kasarani siku ya inauguration. Nikasema tumekuta Kenya imeisha. Kwa store hata panya alitoroka, hakuna kitu ya kukula. Tulikuta madeni chungu nzima. Rais ameng'ang'ana karibu 1 year. Hata tuko na ingine kubwa inaitwa Eurobond, inakuja mwezi ya 6. Ndio tunang'ang'ana vile tutalipa. Kwa sababu ukikuta madeni ilichukuliwa na serikali iliyoko mbele yako, those are your debts.
Those are your debts. Now, the Deputy President says that they found 9.8 trillion shilling worth of public debt. I don't know how that figure arrives at that, because the figures as of September 2022 would appear it was 8.7 trillion shillings. Now it is over 11 trillion shillings based on the numbers from the National Treasury as of December 2023 and counting. Well, a bit of it is because of what has happened to the Kenya shilling, the depreciation against major currencies, including the dollar. But there we are. And Mheshimiwa Kanyudia, let's talk about that, because we have just spoken about the expenditure, the budget policy statement. But then again, there has been a campaign against public borrowing. But we see it continuing to date, even in the current administration. Where is the honesty here in talking about public debt?
A country borrows because of the circumstances it is in at that particular point in time. Kenya has suffered, the Kenyan shilling has suffered against the dollar or hand currencies because of what we all know. First of all, the American dollar has increased in value due to the interest rates that has been basically has been increasing within the American resource system, and that has made the dollar more expensive than it is. So then there's the scarcity of the dollar itself, and scarcity means low supply, and if there's low supply, then it means there's demand for the dollar, and the cost of the dollar has gone up because of the competing needs to buy things from outside and so on. The trending systems, the kind of things that have been trending on, as our trending portfolio has not really been growing as much. So there are very many reasons why Kenya needed to cushion this particular problem. And if a country that is runs on the revenue that a country is generating, that's the revenue that is distributed across the various centers, the various cost centers. It is not possible to generate enough revenue on day one and distribute it across. That is why we have staggered releases of treasury releases. We cannot say Treasury at the beginning of the year releases all the money that is needed for that year because our reserves are not enough. So first of all, the reserves are low. Secondly, we cannot, collect that kind of money within a very short time to be able to cope up. So what happens is prioritization of what one has to do. Because it is human beings who are managing this. There is need for prioritization. Kenyan debt, yes, has increased. There's no doubt about it. But then the question is, are we paying? That's the most important thing, is that we are paying. And we are paying it at a higher cost than it was before because the shilling has also lost in value. And maybe we may ask, why do we then have to go to countries like the president has been in Japan and try to negotiate some credit facility? Japan as a country has a very good relationship with Kenya. First of all, they will give you what are called concessional loans at 0.1% of interest, give you 12 years grace period, and then stagger it over 40 years. That's a very soft loan in the first place. And this money is going to be used to now cushion the issues that there are right now. And there has been a bit of criticism, why is Kenya also going to IMF? Well, when you decide to go to IMF, it means you want to open up your situation to be, under scrutiny. IMF scrutinizes what happens across the world, and IMF will only give you money if you agree to develop policies to deal with the issue that you went for the money for. I think that is how IMF operates. So the debt portfolio could have increased, but the circumstances, the situation as that has been brought by the situation we are in right now, have led to the increase in a little bit of borrowing. But then we are looking at more of concessional loans than, of course, the very expensive commercial loans.
And talk to me about, so in the last budget-making process for the current financial year, the deficit was arrived at 718 billion shillings. And I remember at that time, the heavier burden was on domestic borrowing. It was 586 billion shillings and very minimal, 131 billion shillings from the external sources. But then, 2 months later, that was changed. And external rose from 131 to 402 billion shillings, and domestic reduced to 316 billion shillings. I mean, what informs this that was not available for the people when they were doing the public participation and when Parliament was passing the budget, such that now, 2 months later, it is all of a sudden available? What's going on?
Kenyan government tries as much as possible, let me say Treasury, to manage the fiscal deficit through various forms of fiscal consolidation, trying to reduce the deficit, the amount of money that is not taken care of within the budget system, the revenue collection system, because the deficit we are talking about is what you are able to collect vis-a-vis what you are not able to get, and then you have to get it from some source. As much as possible, that needs to be reduced so that at least a country can run on its own. Initially, at the point of releasing the budget, you see, some of these things are forecast, and you have relationships going on, discussions going on, but they have not yielded any fruit. You cannot factor something that has not borne fruits and say, okay, we shall borrow so much from here, and then, but if doors keep on opening, and you have possibilities, that is why sometimes you may even find that we may have supplementary budgets.
But Mheshimiwa, does Parliament have a say on the structure of how you're going to finance the deficit?
Yeah, the Parliament makes proposals on how the deficit is supposed to be financed. And in the last budget, a lot more was to be borrowed from within. But if possibilities open for longer-term, cheaper loans, wouldn't you go for better possibilities? If
Parliament approves that the larger share of 586 is going to be borrowed locally, should the Treasury just change that without involving Parliament?
Now, the Treasury doesn't change that without involving Parliament, because you realize there was a budget, a supplementary budget, which basically captured the entire situation. You see, supplementary budget actually is another budget. It's a total revision of the entire budget. So even what is already given out...
It came way later after the announcement by Kamau Thuge, the Central Bank of Kenya governor.
You see, there are situations that might not wait.
That's what I'm asking.
And just as we have spending through Article 223, there are certain situations that might not wait. Once you have an opportunity, which is better for Kenya, would you rather Kamau Thuge wait for the Parliament?
This is not about 223. This is about the structure of borrowing. Yeah. You come and communicate to the country that we have accessed more resources and therefore we are reducing the borrowing from domestic and increasing from the external market. Yeah. Even if a supplementary budget comes way later, it is just to approve, or rather to rubber stamp.
To regularize. It's basically to regularize.
Exactly. So that's what I'm asking.
And that provision is in the Constitution. The Constitution makers were not foolish to put in such a provision. Regularization comes in, I think, around 3 months or so after.
You're talking about 2 to 3. I'm talking about the structure of borrowing.
It's quite interesting because the challenge with debt is not, first of all, the challenge of debt is not debt itself. It's first of all where we are spending it. And I think we've said this many, many times that part of the big challenge we have right now is because how we accounted, how well we have used the proceeds of debt, including the Eurobond that we are now, looking for everything to, to pay it back. And by the look of things, we are going to be paying it at 4% higher. So we are taking a loan at 4% higher to refinance. So, basically looking for another bond at 11%. Our offer is 11%. Who knows what we'll get back? We might be given back 14%. But to refinance something we took at a 6.8%. Was that the Auditor General, when they did the review, they said some of the money could not be traced to any specific project. 700 billion of that, and this is on public record, actually, it's on Parliament website in terms of the report that the Auditor General provided, said that was spent outside the system. A good portion of that money was spent outside the system, including what was paid off for some syndicated loan offshore. So the point that we actually cannot be able to trace the money where it was spent, then it means we are having to go back to our pockets. It's literally that you took a loan, you know, to start a business, then you went on holiday. Not that holiday is anything bad, but then when it comes to payment, there is no revenue you are getting. So for me, I think that's been a big challenge around that. But let's come to the question that you asked, Mheshimiwa. Our biggest risk right now is domestic, and that therefore for me was a surprise when there was a shift from, you know, more external to more domestic. And I honestly think that Parliament should have had a say in that shift because it's the one that approves the medium-term debt strategy, unless it doesn't matter much. Which I think should matter a lot. And the reason for that is that debt procurement, even domestically, the latest coupon that is going, I mean, the 6.5 years, 8.5 years, 70 billion right now, is at 18%. Chances are that depending, because it's going to depend on the market, it may settle at 21% when all the bidders have finished tomorrow as their Valentine gift. Is that it affects not just government operations, but affects the economy in totality, because this is basically money that you're getting from the credit market at a rate, because if government is going to be lent, you know, at almost 20%, what will an individual investor and businessman be lent at from government? So, and therefore, the discussion around domestic borrowing is not just about that government needs money, but it's also at what cost? What is the trade-off? You know, and the trade-off here means is that it's the businesses we expect to be able to be profitable, to be able to pay tax, and you can see how that circular, that connection is, so that then, right now, government seems to be the investment of choice. Banks are making good profits without necessarily supporting any growth in the economy, as it were, because it's not necessarily facilitating business performance. And there are many questions about even the money that actually gets lent to government, because as you saw in that list, there was also universities, semi-autonomous government agencies, and with the 10,000 accounts that the government has in banks, does government borrow from itself? That's a story for another day. But the discussion within Parliament about domestic borrowing, and that's what I'm trying to expand here, is that it needs to be seen in the totality of what it does to the rest of the economy. And that's why I think Parliament needs to have a very big say. Secondly, whereas, and Mheshimiwa said, whereas a lot of the external financing, the only risk we have is forex fluctuation, forex rate fluctuation, we are getting those loans at 6%, 7%, I think 11%, the current bond will be the highest that we've gotten from out there. In-house, or in the country domestically, we are getting it at 15%, 16%, 17%. Now you see the challenge you have here, and that's where you have shifted to borrow more from. Right. So for me, that's a concern which Parliament, even as they reopen today and in this budget policy statement, needs to have that conversation. Because even the proposals for looking at the BPS, the draft at least that came from Parliament, again, you see for 2024-2025, the bigger focus is still on domestic borrowing. It's actually 377 billion against 326 billion, bringing in the net deficit to about 704. So there's still a bigger focus on borrowing domestically. That conversation needs to be held.
Though that may change.
That may change. Yes, it may change actually higher, depending. But I think it's critical that the conversation is held based on, because right now, business are struggling. The best thing you can do to business and to this country right now is make credit affordable. And that has been my concern even with the housing levy. I don't think we should be actually having a levy. What we should be having is affordable mortgage so that people can buy the kind of houses they want for themselves and also contribute to the building of the economy. So in a space where the businesses are struggling, what you need is credit. But what credit, if you get credit at 22%, 23%, the other day I did just a calculation, and for getting a loan from a bank, and one of the rates actually came to almost 32%. I was shocked.
How much?
32%. I mean, the calculator you do online, when you put the terms and what you want, and it was for an asset financing, it came to 32%. 32%, then you're like, what are you going to do about it? So you drop it. Now imagine businesses that have to rely on credit every day.
Right, and you've said something interesting, that government has 10,000 accounts, so are they borrowing from themselves, over 10,000? Would you know how much deposits they have therein?
If you look at some of the latest report, we have some parastatals having as much as, I think, some of it runs into billions. I need to check the actual numbers, but I know the latest discussion in cabinet has been about the single treasury account. I'm sure you have heard that. That is what it's trying to fix, because all these accounts are in commercial banks.
But there's always a reason why government have so many accounts. And some of it is actually mischief. And some of it is actually based on wrong government policies. I'll be very honest with you. The problem with the national government is that the national government has got only 1 or 2 financial institutions in the tier 1 that they deposit their money into. What government needs to do is to be able to spread the risk. You know, deposit money in tier 1, tier 2 banks, so that tier 3 banks can get somewhere to borrow money from. That's number 1. Number 2, in terms of the issue of mischiefs, if you go to county governments, as an example, a lot of county governments are operating on overdraft. So what does that mean? If, for instance, Narok County has an overdraft account with KCB, the moment they get the exchequer release, KCB takes their money.
Right.
So you'll find that Narok County will move from KCB, they'll go to I&M Bank, as a practical example. And they decide that we're opening our bursary fund account there. And yet last year, they opened it in Equity Bank. So this mischief has got to be solved, because then when they go to I&M Bank, as an example, they will be given credit based on the amount of money they deposit. Like a practical example is that Narok County requested about 250 million shillings to pay for bursaries. But when they went to I&M Bank, they borrowed another additional 150 million. If they had done that in KCB, KCB would not have given them, because they already have an account there. So and KCB is waiting for them to get the exchequer releases so that they can recover their debt. So that's the mischief that must be resolved. And how do we resolve that? Is it the one single treasury account? I disagree. I think that will bring in a lot of problems. For me, we cannot always compare, we must compare apples to apples. The reason why Kenya is moving into the one single treasury account is basically because they are seeing India is doing that. But we are not at the same level as India. You know, Narendra Modi policies are completely different than our own policies in this country. So I think what we have to do now is for us in Parliament, and I'm happy that my brother is here, for us to be able to come up with a credit rating system that does not only rate businesses, but also rates county governments, such that if today I wanted to take a loan, and I go to my bank, my bank, let's say KCB, if I have a loan that I have not paid in equity, they will tell me, first of all, go pay that loan. But that doesn't compare the same way with the county governments or even departments, you know, government departments. So I think on this credit rating system, it has to cut across. Okay. You know, and we also have to ensure that we fully follow the Public Finance Management Act, which really stipulates on how many accounts a government body can have. Maybe amend it to make sure that those accounts, the commercial accounts, are limited, and that before the executive can open a new bank account, it has to be approved by the Assembly, or it has to be approved by Parliament. That is the only way you can be able to cure that mischief.
Interesting. And Alex, talk to me about, because in all these things, even the deficits that he's talking about for 2024, 2025, there has to be the question of revenue collection. And I remember that currently the KRA was given a target of, I think, 2.57 trillion shillings. And there's a plan to raise that to about 4 trillion shillings by the end of the current administration's term. But then what the economy is looking like, there's no practical assurance that this can actually happen. How do we become more realistic in our revenue projections, knowing the space that we are in and all the challenges that we face?
That's interesting, because I've been tracking revenue performance for some time, and for, I could say, maybe 3 years. And what happens is that somehow, just around May, June, there's a lot of money that is reported to have come in, and then the Revenue Authority is said to have met its targets. How true that is, it's a different question. But there's some positives. So one, all this is within the medium-term revenue strategy document for the government for 2024-2025, moving to 2026-2027. So for once, the government is somehow clear around what they want to do around revenue collection, and some of it is informed, for example, by IMF. And for the IMF, they're more concerned around the tax to GDP ratio, and there's the discussion of how do we move it from the 14 to 16% currently to around 20% over the medium-term revenue strategy document, yeah? So how do we move it? So the predictability that comes with the medium-term revenue strategy document and the national tax policy, at least that is a welcome move. And some of the measures that I see there to make sure that at least our projections are realistic, you have the target to the informal sector, and we have seen what the government is doing around electronic tax invoice management system to make sure we get all people around the hard-to-tax sector, the informal sector, agriculture, and I'll wait to hear what Daktari will talk about that, to make sure that these people are actually paying their fair share of taxes. Then to encourage some more like tax compliance, they're trying to make it easy for the ordinary person to actually pay tax. As an example, I think just recently we have *222# for e-teams. Remember, people have been saying you're rolling out an electronic tax invoice management system. It's not easy to follow. How will the Mamamboga, for example, comply with that? So you have the *222# USSD code, which allows that person to actually register for e-teams and even raise a sales invoice through e-teams. And just before I leave that e-teams discussion, you have the regulations that were supposed to come out, and the ones at least I've seen, they had a threshold of 5 million to ensure that anyone who is not within the VAT threshold of 5 million is also not required to comply with e-teams. But somehow, when it came to printing at the government printers, that document mysteriously cannot be found. And so according to KRA, at least as at now, everyone has to comply with the e-teams regulations, whether or not they meet that particular threshold. But that is just e-teams. You have digital service tax that is coming in within that particular document, and especially for residents. What has been happening is it's just applied for non-residents. You have a good thing around the plan to reduce corporation tax from 30% to 25%. And I think much of it is informed through the experience we had during the COVID period, where the government reduced taxes, and as a result, our tax to GDP ratio was good compared to what happened after we removed those tax reliefs. And of course, you have discussions around the VAT rate, also reducing it from the 16% to around 15%, to kind of see if this tax to GDP ratio that IMF is imposing, at least we'll be able to get it. But on the reverse side, what I expect to see is a lot of tax audits by the Kenya Revenue Authority, intense, informed by intelligence. You have revenue officers that were just appointed recently. We were moving door to door, business to business. So a lot of enforcement and audits will happen. There's a discussion to reintroduce again minimum tax, a huge discussion, but again, meant to ensure that we get back to getting the revenues that the country is looking at. And for guys who are supplying to the government, they're also being targeted in terms of withholding tax, so that when I get a tender, I supply to the government or a county government, first I am gotten into, my information is with KRA, because the county government or the government has to ensure they withhold tax on even supply of goods, not just services. So what that means is that at least when I account for whatever percent, be it 5%, then the Revenue Authority will be expecting me to also account for the 95% in terms of my revenue. And of course, there is withholding tax on imports, but also removal of exemptions and tax reliefs, which is also a very big discussion right now, because what the government is trying to do within this MTRS is to make sure that for the longest, the revenues that perhaps we have not collected because we've given someone an incentive, for example, to build something at an SEZ facility. We've given someone, for example, in pharmaceuticals industry, some incentives for them to manufacture human vaccines, etc. They want to check that and perhaps limit them to make sure that we don't have such tax leakages. And finally, which is something good and will help, of course, in terms of revenue collection, is the tax amnesty program that was introduced through Finance Act 2023. And guys have until June of this year to take advantage of that tax amnesty program, which I see as another big move to encourage people to actually pay all principal taxes that were due up to the 1st of December 2022 in exchange for waiver of penalties and interest. So these are some of the things that I see the government is trying to do.
Do you know how successful that has been so far?
I think it has been successful, and I'll go back to what we had before. So we had the voluntary tax disclosure program within our laws, which allowed the Revenue Authority to kind of have a discussion with the taxpayer, and you disclose whatever your liabilities are. In exchange for that, they would give you waiver of penalties and interest, but it was kind of a phased approach. If you disclosed early, around from 2021, you could get up to 100% waiver. Okay. But if you disclose late up to around 2023, then your waiver would only be limited to 25%. And out of that, the Revenue Authority actually collected billions of shillings from that particular measure.
And before we move away from that question of taxation, the President has been speaking about the tax to GDP ratio and saying ours is about 15% or thereabout, and saying that we need to do more to raise that. And the understanding of especially the people that are directly hit by any taxation policy that is or measure that is passed in this country would feel like this is too much because already they're feeling the pain, whether it's on the pay slip, whether it's on the consumption taxes. What should this exactly mean without overburdening those people that are already netted or in the net of taxation?
It's simple. It's the expansion of the tax base. So who are we taxing? Should we continue focusing on the same employee as an example, or the same company as an example? For the employee, we've seen a lot of focus around social health, insurance, housing levy, NSSF. They increased to about 35% pay as you earn for high-income earners. Then for corporations, we've seen at least there's a promise to reduce that. But now we have to look at, we have to look at the farmers, we have to look at the boda, we have to look at anyone within the informal sector to also contribute something to this. Because if, for example, the next thing you hear from our Finance Bill 2024, which we expect to come out soon, in the next 2 or 3 months, if you then hear that they are also targeting your payslip again, I guess people will start now to structure even employment, formal employment, so that then the government will wait to see a reduction in terms of collection of their pay as you earn, just because they are targeting a few people who are getting tired already and perhaps are not seeing the kind of service that is commensurate with the kind of taxes that they're already paying.
Sam, before we move away, I'm listening to my brother speaking here, and I can only, what I'm hearing is IMF and the World Bank. All these policies. You know, I want to go back to my years in school when I was studying economics. And in Economics 101, we talked about the Laffer curve. And one of the key questions that was asked is that what is our practical optimum tax rate, which maximizes tax revenue? You know, and, you know, when you look at the Laffer curve, There are so many things that we tax: fuel, housing, industrial tax, all these, department taxes. What can we reduce? What can we take away so that we be able to encourage, growth in the tax revenue? And for me, it has always been that you have to, cut taxes. If you reduce the taxes, you will encourage economic activities that will, in turn, increase tax revenue. It's a very simple process. So right now, if we are looking at taxing citizens, what is the base? And this is a question that has been asked even by the Commission of Revenue Allocation. They're saying, county governments, every year you come up with your finance bill, and you say, we are going to increase these taxes, we are going to tax. What services are you giving these people so that it can justify for you to be able to increase those taxes? A very simple one is, like, for instance, we've been having a big issue in terms of Narok County raising the fees to enter the park. What services are they giving to the people who are now going to be paying $200 instead of paying $100? What is the base? I think one of the institutions that failed this country was the Transitioning Authority. The Transitioning Authority really needed to guide this country from the defunct, government to now the devolved government structure. Number one. Number two, we cannot continue saying that we want to tax these farmers, yet we're not even helping the farmers. We're not helping. If you now come in and you tell pastoralists that you're going to now have to register for their cows, where are you normally? Do you even fix roads for them? Do you know the area? So we have to be practical here. We have to ask ourselves, are we going to, what my brother here said, that people are going to now even restructure employment because there'll be so many taxes in their payslip such that they may not even feel like...
Senator, how do you balance what you're saying versus everyone with an income needs to pay their share of the taxes, because the pastoralists, the farmers, these people that are in the informal economy, they're making a revenue.
It's a very simple thing. How do you balance? What services are you rendering to them? Okay? It's a two-way traffic. You cannot continue taxing me, yet you don't even offer me a basic road. You don't even offer me a basic hospital. You collect revenue to be able to fix infrastructure. You don't even fix my infrastructure. You become selective on what you do. So the challenge we have here is this. We completely have very poor government policies when it comes to the issue of taxation. I reiterated here, and I said the most important thing is for Kenya Revenue to look at itself as a business partner with any business out there. Whatever business is out there, we are partners, 50-50. Such that you don't come in and say, we're going to target the boda, you're going to target the mamamboga. That mamamboga, by the time she gets that cabbages in her stall, the level of taxation from cess collection from each and every county, all the way to where even when she's also paying another cess to the county assembly, and there's not even no basis of taxing her for that cess, you still have to tell her, okay, you've already paid all these cess collections that have been onboarded to your cost of the product that you're selling. And then on top of that, we still want you to do what? To pay 3,000 shillings on a daily basis for you to be able to put up a stall on the side of the road. That's ludicrous.
Dr. Mutunga, talk to me. What did I just say? Dr. Mutunga, talk to me about... because he raises questions about what services are you offering? But also, someone employed might ask, what services is it that you're directly offering that person? There were those proposals in the MTRS, medium-term revenue strategy. A part of it is to tax 5% withholding tax of all produce that is presented before a cooperative. How do you achieve this so that you have more revenues, yes, but the bigger section of the population is well sensitized, so that even if they're making a contribution, of course, we would want to pay less, but they're making a contribution which they're already aware of and almost agreeable to?
It would not be wrong to talk of taxing the produce, agricultural produce. But let's look at the entire agricultural value chain and ask ourselves whether we are already overtaxing these people. First of all, at the inputs level, they buy inputs which are already taxed. Then they go into a production process where they will do the plowing and disease control, disease and pest control and so on. Anything they use there has already escalations in terms of what is provided for in taxes. Then you go to processing, very few of them, and transportation to the market. Now, two things that must happen for you to be able to say that we now can get so much money from the farming community. First of all, we must be able to be predictable on what it is that you are producing. Are we, as a country, can we say that we should produce so much? We are heavily rain dependent. And of course, we learned the efforts in the current government of trying to bring in a lot of mega dams and smaller dams, other dams and so on, which will more or less guarantee products at the end of the day. Most of the Kenyan farmers suffer because they are vulnerable to the environment. The changes in the weather, changes in the environment will basically determine whether they will harvest anything. Then we need also to be sure that we can guarantee the farmers prices that will be commensurate to the cost of production. Okay, government comes in to intervene sometimes by reducing the cost of inputs like the fertilizers, and sometimes seeds and seedlings and so on. And then at the end of the day, this farmer is not organized towards the end of the chain because they are small in scale, and therefore we need to aggregate the produce for them to be able to gain from economies of operation. The more they sell in small bits and the more they meet at the marketplace, all of them at the same time, they bring down the prices because they don't have storage facilities. So we need to have an entire investment in infrastructure, storage infrastructure, so that we can encourage aggregation. We have seen some efforts in the aggregation centers and cold storage since that the government is coming up with. But until we realize that the farmer's produce can follow a certain predictable path that at the end of the day will reduce the cost to that farmer and will give them a price to their product which is commensurate to the amount of investment they have made. Sometimes, we really milk the farmers because we do not consider them to be charging their labor. If you put input, the value of the cost of labor, the cost of inputs and others, at the end of the day, you will be able to know this crop or this product has landed onto the market at this price in terms of the cost. So if the farmer sells at less, we are basically killing them. And that's basically what happens in this country. So
would the target the strategy that he's speaking about, would it succeed in...
The strategy will succeed as long as we can also guarantee a production process that is reliable and predictable. Why? Because we need to be sure that once this farmer has produced, they will produce, first of all, quantities that will guarantee total cost of their labor. The total cost that they have gone through has been taken up. And secondly, the produce they have placed in the market is of value, of a price that basically gives them cushions their costs. So those are things that you need to be sure of. Let me give you some specific example that can be, for instance, if you are producing rice in Mwea, you know for sure you'll get the water for irrigation. You know for sure through the NIA, you will probably get the correct varieties. And you'll be able to produce within 3 months and you sell. You know for sure you will process around Mwea and you can place it in the market. That's a predictable system. Most of the systems in this country are not. Agricultural production systems are not predictable. There is drought just sets in and everything is crushed. There's even a number, you now have to look for money to buy food for the farmers because they're the greater majority of the population. When you have a large population dependent on agriculture, it means you have to feed them when they can't feed themselves. And that is where the problem is now.
You speak about aggregation of produce.
Yes.
What do you have in mind? How should it work?
It should work in such a way that because farmers are basically organizing the farmers. We are now registering the farmers. The ministry is registering the farmers. Let's not just register them so that they can have access to insurance facilities and so on. Let's register them to also know what do they do with their produce. And for us to be able even to industrialize this country, we must be able to talk about the amount of goods or the amount of produce, agricultural produce of various types that you can aggregate at any one time. Smallholders must aggregate for them to access market properly. If they don't aggregate, other middlemen or middle persons benefit from their produce. Those who are able to buy from them at very low prices and then they store them for 2 or 3 months, then they're able to get the cushion.
We don't have this.
We do not have, it is not enough. We only have it in a few areas that we need to do to cut across the entire country.
What was Moses Kuria launching across the country?
Yes, those are aggregation centers that they are doing right now. That's an effort that is happening right now. After a lot of prodding, after a lot of a lot of push, we are seeing that we have they are calling the industrial parks and aggregation centers. The reason why they are linking the two is because an aggregation center will provide raw materials for the industrial park. So that is the concept that needs to really be done properly in this country for us to be able to guarantee or to predict even whether farmers will get any produce from any benefit.
Senator Ledama, I didn't hear what you said.
No, I'm just saying, you see, the problem we have in this country is that we like launching. Why don't you just build the damn thing and let people use it? And then you come in and celebrate and say, this is happening. Those launching is just to dupe the public that there's something that you're doing and you're not doing it. So really, the key most important thing is that we need to move away from this culture of wanting to be praised that you're doing things, and you don't. You know, go around the country. My good friend Moses Kuria came to Narok and launched an industrial park. You know, and then during that launch period, there were like 2 or 3 sort of like layers of stones that were, you know, erected, and that's it. They disappeared. You know, so all these things, every single government project.
So the 3 stones are still there.
The 3 stones are still there. You know, seriously. And then just wait. They will stay again for another 6 months, and then they'll come back and launch again. You know, that is the culture in this government today. They launch projects that were launched by Uhuru. In fact, they might even launch some projects which were launched by Moi. You know, but the rate they're going. All we need to do is to ask ourselves, how is this helping the poor people down there? You know, let me tell you, nowadays a governor cannot even build a toilet and allow citizens to use it. He has to go and launch that toilet.
But Sam, I have a comment on that.
I think it's important to say this, that the launching that has been happening, I think some of it is relaunching, of course, because we must finish government projects that were left hanging. So it is important to go back and restate that particular process.
And relaunch it again.
No, listen. What Kuria was doing is a collaborative effort between the county government and the national government. So if the county government of Narok has done nothing, then they should not blame the national government. It's actually a joint effort, half-half. They are paying 50% each. We are putting in resources for the industrial parks and aggregation centers.
Yeah. Okay.
I think I wanted to say, first I agree with Mheshimiwa in terms of the Laffer curve, and I've already mentioned about it in terms of the corporation tax reducing from 30 to 25 within the plan, and VAT reducing from 16% to 15% within the plan. Then to the comment of, then must we wait for the other people within the informal sector to be given social amenities or infrastructure, so that at that point, that's when we start taxing them? What does that mean? Does it mean then we stop even taxing the employees and the companies? Because even them, they're crying. They also want to see these facilities. They're talking about terrible roads, inconsistent supply of raw materials, water, etc., poor basic health facilities. So if we then adopt the approach of let's wait first until there's some form of service that has gone to these people, then perhaps we will never start. Okay. So we need to have that serious discussion around everyone paying their fair share of taxes. It could be difficult as a start, but we must get there.
All right.
Yeah. But the danger in that is that...
Let's hear from Dr. Rugo.
But let me just correct something. The danger in what you're saying is that you might have a farmer who has produced at lower, than the prices, higher than the prices you can get from the market.
That's very true.
A kilo of maize costing, the cost of production is 25 shillings, for instance, or 15, then it sells as 10 shillings. What are we doing to such a farmer? So if you load a tax on such a person, what are you saying?
It's the same thing with minimum tax.
Sorry, but farmers have been getting subsidized fertilizer. I don't know how the success of that...
Senator, please. It has been very successful. It has been very successful in the sense that it has brought down the cost of production a bit. And then it has also enabled, of course, increase the productivity in production.
Okay, so that has not been measured statistically, but let me just ask, well, the rains are very good. Let me just ask the question.
Yes.
The subsidized fertilizer, what does IMF think about that?
You see, every country subsidizes their agriculture. Whatever IMF thinks or doesn't think is their problem. What we need to do is, as a country, we should not borrow money to subsidize. We should be able to generate resources our own to subsidize. And that is allowed even in the agreements on agriculture. Whatever you do in your domestic support is your problem. But don't look for money from another country to subsidize your agriculture.
You say whatever IMF thinks about the subsidy of fertilizer doesn't matter?
Well, there are many things I want to say, but let me say 2-3 things. One is that whatever tax regime you put in place is dependent on 2 things: whether the citizenry have incomes and whether services are being provided. It doesn't matter, whichever system we go. Now, I see us as a country almost locked between some communist kind of a thing where government provides everything to the citizens and therefore also wants to get all the money, and some social democracy of the, the equivalent of the Nordic countries, where you pay very high taxes and then you have services provided. The challenge is that we need to determine that our biggest job, and this is my challenge to Parliament as it resumes today, that perhaps their biggest job is to rethink how we create jobs. We are not shouting enough and we are not speaking enough. The fact is businesses are closing down. And how do we know this? People are being sacked, because when you look at even the reports we are seeing, is that the 3 taxes that have gone down are income tax, and of course, when income tax goes down, it's quickly followed by excise duty, because it's the people who have an income tax, who pay an income tax, are able to do the transactions. And of course, import duty, because who imports cars, who imports all these things, are people who actually have some income. And the cry everywhere is that businesses are not performing. Right. People are losing jobs. So income discussion must, because you can load it as much as you want. And even what Dr. is saying about agriculture, the problem there is that there are no incomes. It's not that people are not willing to participate in the agriculture sector. It's that there are no incomes, because you produce so high. And remember, even some of the inputs are taxed. So I think even saying that people don't pay tax, I think is fallacious. Everybody pays tax. It's a question of how many are actually paying income tax that commensurate to what they make. I think that's a discussion, especially in the informal sector. That's one. Secondly, I think we cannot continue to levy higher taxes and not provide public services. Finally, something will have to give. Take an example, education sector. A lot of parents are right now wondering which private schools to go to because of the nature of things. You go to boarding schools and it's a crisis. You go to capitation. What time is it released? We are told some money was released in January, but remember this was money to cover the debts of last year. For food, for those kind of security. I mean, all these services that we expect from government, water, health services. So that these are services you already have paid your fair share of tax. You go to the facility, you don't get the service. You go to a private sector, you pay out of pocket. You cannot do both. You have to make a choice. And that's why I think what he was saying. Then you force people to then say, okay, fine. If I am going, so for instance, now with the new health contributions, if you're going to charge me 2.75% of my gross income, I then should be able to walk to any health facility and get all the services that I require. But what if I go and I don't get, and even with the NHIF, you remember we also had challenges, especially if you're not a civil servant. You go for some of these services, you're told, no, that's for civil servant. So that's the second. So the question of service provision has to take a center stage. But lastly, is we cannot continue to discuss this matter of taxes as though revenue is the only problem we have. I have held the position that we don't have a revenue problem. Year on year, our revenues have been going up. Even with the saturation of how much can be collected, our revenues have actually been going up. What we have is an expenditure problem, that we are still spending at a higher rate than even what we can realistically collect. And you see the targets, you see the targets from this year to next year, from, 3.5 something to 4.05. I was just checking the actual number. It's quite a huge jump of what we want to be able to collect. So 2024, 2025 is still here. But when you look at 25, 26, you're having very big jumps in terms of how much revenue you want to collect, as though the only challenge you have is a revenue problem. I don't think it's a revenue problem. And the fiscal consolidation discussion that we've been having is a rationalization issue of expenditure. And a good example is, what are we going to do, and our Waheshimiwa are here. It's time we made a decision, what are we going to do with parastatals? We have duplicated too many roles.
Right.
We are spending 30%, almost 30% of our budget is run by parastatals, state-owned government agencies. In the water sector, we have a bunch of 10 of them. I think in energy, you have a whole array of them, Kura, Kera, Kenha, and many others in between there in infrastructure. You come to agriculture. You still have so many boards, and on top you created the AFA, the Agriculture Food Authority, that was supposed to merge all these because what they are doing, first of all, they are the ones giving us the highest risk exposure to debt. They are the ones holding over 80% of the pending bills. They are the ones who have not paid suppliers and contractors. And this is on record. But thirdly, they are also the ones we are still borrowing more for. So they are still pushing our public guaranteed debt higher and higher. It's time.
So tell me, Daktari, I mean, it looks like a very big problem to deal with. And I hear you when you say that you cannot continue to tax without commensurate service provision. And you even enumerate some of the social services, for instance, education and health. Yet here you are, someone is taxed, whether it's income tax on the employee, but also on the companies who are the employers. So you tax them. But then the employees will have to find their own way of financing education. They have to find their own way of financing health, whether it's in the private medical schemes that there are. But also now the social health insurance is coming in, and the proposed rate appears to be quite significant if you compare with what has been going on. But then when do all these things begin to make sense? Because budgeting is happening. It's depending on services, but on taxes, but taxes are supposed to be financing services, but services are being financed by the Social Health Insurance Fund. So when do we stop and when do we start making sense of all this contribution?
We have an opportunity, as I've said, and the opportunity that presents itself right now is a discussion that is going on with the budget policy statement, for instance, just as a start. And follow through, and this is a challenge to the departmental committees, both in the county assemblies and in the National Assembly. The follow-through on implementation, especially on non-financial implementation, the actual service implementation, has been very weak. Because that's where we are able to say, are health services being provided? We made a budget of X. Are health services actually being provided? And some of it can actually take even actual visits to some of those facilities. Listening to Kenyans, every member of parliament has an office where they can receive this feedback. Now we have technology which can help us to aggregate. A committee sitting can receive, we've tried it at the International Budget Partnership, where we are able to have a Zoom conversation, and you can get views from as many as 30, 40 counties at the same time. Social audits are there. So that tracking, because if we don't follow through with implementation, it means we just give money for certain budget implementation, then we sit back. So that follow through, because oversight, the part of oversight, does not just mean at the approval stage. It also means at implementation. And Parliament is the only one that has the power to actually call the education, the CS or SHES, come and tell us. You can say all these things, migrate to e-citizen and all those kind of things. Has capitation gone to schools with 2,000 children and don't know where the next meal will come from? I mean, they are not charity homes. These are public institutions. So my thinking is that has to be done. Secondly, we need to reset by deciding about the deficit. Because what the deficit does is that it causes reverse engineering. If Parliament today said we are only going to approve a deficit of so much, government has to go and reorganize itself. Last year we kept talking about, let's talk about how we shall refinance some of these loans. We were told, no, it's going to be a bullet payment. Now we are exactly there. and because it's crisis, you have 2 months to do a roadshow and convince guys at the London Stock Exchange. Now you'll get that money at the highest rate anybody is willing, because it's $2 billion. You know, you don't have that kind of money, you know, just lying somewhere. So that kind of forward-thinking kind of engagement on these policy decisions. But bottom line, let us follow through with implementation. Let us listen to Kenyans.
All right. I will take closing remarks, but first let me take a look at the feedback that we have at Citizen TV Kenya. Sam Gituku, the hashtag to use is #daybreak. And begin with who? What Kenyans are saying. This is Sir Nixon Dogire. Parliament resumes. Parliament to deal squarely and affirmatively, I bet you mean family, with unstoppable government projects. Bob Otieno, Parliament should take into serious what's affecting Wanjiku and put the agenda first, not serving their interests and rubber-stamping government's priorities without checking or questioning the executive. Engineer Lazaro, Kenyans should be told how government spent the Eurobond. We can't be just paying debt, the debt-paying machines. So devastating to watch blame game of the same mysterious loan, the Eurobond taken during Uhuru's tenure. Rev Hari, truth be said, the economy is changing, and by the way, as it was said by God, at the start of this year, shilling will be stronger by April this year. Mark this tweet. Only let the government deal with all cartels and agents of corruption. God bless. Franco Rinde, you're saying that Kenya Kwanza government has been borrowing money since they got into office. We are not seeing any new projects being initiated. Instead, they have been relaunching projects done by the previous regime. Where are the loans going to? The economy is deteriorating as they watch.
The incomplete ones.
Godi Baraza, as our shilling continues to take a hit and the public debt crosses to 11 trillion mark, this is a very critical moment for the Kenya Kwanza administration to put a leash on unnecessary expenditure, I bet. Karaoke Moiri, default will come after June this year and bank failure will take place due to mismanagement by CBK. Then contagion will create run on banks, leading to more NPLs. Uhuru debt pile-up was a poison chalice that even IMF might not be able to handle. And then Ben Kimbwereza, overtaxing Kenyans isn't a better option for raising revenue collection, yet there's nothing to show worthy of the money. In the US, even the commercial pay their taxes. Okay, all right, that's enough. Closing remarks, let me begin with Dr. Mutunga, then Senator Olekina.
Thank you very much for the interventions. I would like to correct one thing. Dr. here has said that the government needs to do a lot more of following up implementation. The committee, in the technical committee agenda, implementation oversight is key. That's what basically we do. Even looking at some of these parastatals and getting to know who they are, what they do, and what kind of situation they are in. And those that are in debt, we are also discussing up to that length. So Parliament is actually doing that a lot more. Not just passing the budget, but we are following a lot more on implementation. And of course, in agriculture, we have so many parastatals. We are trying to make sense out of what do they do, how do they do it, and how profitable is what they do to the farmers.
When do we see results of what you're doing?
We have already, like last Friday, we concluded a session with the State Department for Livestock Development, where we listened to all the parastatals, and now we're doing a report which will launch in Parliament. And if there is anything that needs to be changed, it will be captured very well in the report as a recommendation. Including
closing some?
Of course, including merging some as had been done under AFA. You remember AFA was an amalgamation of around 8 of them that used to be there. But already some of them are jumping out.
Okay,
let me just end it by saying a couple of things. One, I agree with the gentleman with the blue tie. I don't remember his name.
It's Dr. Rugo.
Dr. Rugo. That you know, we need to do something as Parliament in regards to this issue of parastatals. And the first thing that we have to do is to ensure that every piece of legislation that we draft should not have a component of an authority, you know, or a body being set up, you know, that causes us to continue having debt, giving them the power to borrow and to be able to do that. That's number one. Number two, on the issue of the monetary policy, it is sad that as a third world country or a developing country, we don't really have a lot of say when it comes to monetary policies. But I think it's about time that we now start looking at ourselves and really defining sovereignty and looking at a monetary policy that supports sort of like a demand-side economic government monetary policy that encourages a lot of government spending. You know, government should make sure there is a lot of money in the market so that it lowers the interest rates and allows people to spend. You know, higher consumer spending leads to business expansions, resulting to great employment opportunities. Currently, what is happening in this country is that we are losing jobs. We are losing jobs because the interest rates are quite high. You know, we are depending on the IMF and the World Bank to determine how our currency should be valued or devalued. And it's a pity that even in the leadership, even in central bank, that you would have a governor who would say that our currency has been, you know, overvalued. You know, we have to be loyal to our core. You know, we have to be loyal to Kenya. We have to now start saying, you know, asking serious questions. How long are we still going to be, you know, in shackles? You know, how long are we going to be colonized by the IMF and the World Bank? It's about time that we realign our own existing resources. Right. We look at the agricultural sector. You're right. You said it rained quite a lot, and that really, really helped a lot. And I finally agree that we need to do more oversight. We don't. You know, we don't follow through the money. You know, in fact, if you come to the Senate, we don't have an implementation committee. You know, each committee is supposed to sort of like self-implement, and we don't because of the amount of work that we have. Okay. And citizens must also play a key role in ensuring that they call for accountability. That's the only way that we're going to make progress in this country.
Alex, in 30 seconds, please.
Yeah, I think I agree to some extent that we need to have a larger expenditure discussion, and especially this time. On the tax side, I think we're already making a lot of noise. I hope it's making some sense to some people. As you know, for housing levy, that's a different discussion because we made noise about it and nothing was done, and we have it being reintroduced through the affordable housing bill. But on the expenditure side, I guess there's need for either the civil society to bring us together to make a lot of noise around that side, because the reality is, as it is, we already have 65% of our budget going to recurrent expenditure, wages, loans, etc., and the 35% going towards development. And that is not changing anytime soon. So waiting to see a lot in terms of results from the government, I'm not that optimistic with this current situation. And to finalize, then on the public participation bit, then it becomes a little bit more important. And I don't know how we make it work. Like this morning, if you were to perhaps call people in your own estate or village and say there's this that we want to do, how will I be able to convince the farmer not to go to his shamba to continue, for example, you know, plucking their tea, as an example? How will I convince someone in the estate not to go to work because there's public participation that is happening? But we need to get to that level where people are encouraged to actually participate, so that when we then see how the government is planning to spend money, at least we are involved. And when we see also how the government is planning to raise revenue, we are also involved. But Parliament, please, you are our representatives. You are our ear. We expect a lot more from Parliament, not only on oversight, but also on actual representation of the feeling of the people at the ground level.
Dr. Ugo, let me try. Is it possible to spend 30 seconds?
Yeah. First of all, I still believe there is hope. That's why I'm still pushing this agenda. Two, I think we are going to definitely have a couple of months that are going to be rough. But my urge to government is, let's not dig deeper. Let's not dig deeper. Let's try and ease out things in the outer market. And we keep on in the conversation. Thank you very much.
All right. Now we have to come to the end of that conversation. Of course, the Parliament resumes. They have so much work to do, and we'll be looking up to them for the interest of citizens, because nothing can pass into law without Parliament. Nothing as a policy can be better dealt with if it's not through Parliament. Senator Olekina, Mheshimiwa Mutunga, Dr. Rugo, and Alex from CDHK, thank you so much for making time for us for this conversation. Up next is Matters Social. I think Safin is around. My name is Sam Gituku. No, it's Bensu, and not Safin. My name is Sam Gituku. See you again some other time. Bye for now.